Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been inspired and guided to do thanks to my energetic connection with Katajuda. Katajuda is our beautiful, sacred, masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine site. So, what I'm here to do is to give a platform to men so they can speak to other men and directly share their story into the heart, their healing journey, their highs, their lows, their insights, wisdom, tools, practices. What have they learned along the way that they can now share with the other men watching? And of course, us women who are walking right there by their sides. Now, today's guest is a man, an Englishman. I think he's English. We'll find out. And he's living in Liguria in Italia. So, and his name is Ardhan Paul Swatridge. Now, Ardhan he actually contacted me and he told me that he's dedicated to men's work and to the cause of helping women to understand men better in aid of a healthier and happier heart. I thought that was pretty cool. So I invited him onto the show. Now, he is a evolutionary counsellor. He's a breathwork facilitator. He's a guide on a spiritual path. He's a craftsman in wood, a creative writer, and an environmental and change agent. So really looking forward to chatting to Ardhan and hearing all about his journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Ardhan. Welcome to Heart Warriors. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's early in the morning here still. Living in Italy, although I'm English, as you can probably hear from my accent. And so I've had an early start, and yeah, I'm ready to go.
Oh, well, I appreciate you starting so early. So let's find out about you, Ardhan. Who is the man inside when you let go of all your labels and the castle you built around you outside?
Well, as I put in my description in the title, I'm a sensitive man. Um, I'm not an astrologer, but I know enough. I've been told enough about being a Piscean, and I feel like a pretty classic one. That inside I have a thin skin, so that's my my outside almost. And inside I have found uh, challenges in being out in the big world through the many different things that I've done in my life. But I've had a lot of grace to be able to find situations where I can thrive. And so over the long decades of my life, I've kind of made it work for me. And at this stage, having been a very codependent man in relationships, I'm really sort of finding my individual sovereignty. And in the doing of that, I'm writing a book. And so I'm spending a lot of time, it's a memoir, spending a lot of time reflecting on my life. And the man inside feels a lot of grace, actually, for the life I've led. And although I may not be the most effusive of people in terms of offering gratitude to others, I have a lot of gratitude to my higher source. And I describe myself as a mystic pragmatist. So I combine, and I love the combination of bringing elements into my life in which I'm using my hands, making things, doing practical things, growing food, being out in nature. I'm an absolute nature lover. And at the same time, having quite a mystical, philosophical kind of dimension. And I have dedicated a lot of my life to being around and experiencing different spiritual traditions, different practices, and supporting my inner man with that sense of connection to a higher source.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And I know from some of the other heart warriors I've interviewed, sensitivity has come up a few times. So later on in the show, I'm really excited to explore that and, get everything that you have to offer around that subject. But let's start with little Arden. What was his major challenge growing up?
Well, I grew up in the 1950s, it's a long time ago. Um, and I was blessed in that we lived on a small farm. So I had the whole kind of freedom of living in nature, being out, the outdoor life, having animals around me. And whenever other children came to play or to visit, they thought, they must have come to heaven, because most of the people we knew lived either in urban situation or, without the kind of space that we had with all the land and so on. So that was really idyllic. And at the same time, I suppose I've learned later that my parents, kind and very supportive, they were, and they offered my sister and I everything materially we needed. They were very withdrawn themselves. They weren't effusive with their love. I don't remember them telling me that they loved me in, actual words. And we didn't talk about feelings. We didn't really engage at that level. Now, when I was 8, I'd been going to the village school, very small school, and I wasn't progressing that well. I wasn't buckling down to learning, and my mother was a primary school teacher herself, so she was kind of onto that. And there'd been a plan to send me away to boarding school when I was 11 or 12, because some relations in my father's side who didn't have any children of their own had left in their will a legacy for my sister and my education. Anyway, so I was 8 and influenced by somebody who lived up the road who were wealthy, actually, and they were sending their son off to boarding school at this age of 8, 7, 8 even. They decided to send me away to school. I remember them even asking me if I wanted to go, as if I knew what the hell it was going to be, and it was a massive, massive shock to be thrust from this sort of bosom in nature on the farm to a cold alien kind of environment 50 miles away from home. And for the first 3 weeks, we weren't allowed to see our parents at all. And I didn't know it then, but I remember lying in bed on the first night, having been shown to our dormitory, and there was probably 6 or 7 of us in one room. And the lights were turned out by this man who we barely met. And I lay there completely overwhelmed and confused. And I could hear 1 or 2 boys starting to sob under their blankets. And I had this thought, which is still very clear to me. They're crying, but I'm not crying, so I must be okay. And I kind of made it work for me, and I even thrived academically, which shows that I was too traumatized by it, so I thought. But it's taken me many years. I suppose I started to look back into this during an early midlife crisis, when I went into counselling for the first time and received some help to really do some self-inquiry. And I have to say now, and I've only in the last few years been able to say it was a traumatizing experience. And I was away at boarding school, 2 different boarding schools for 10 years until I was 18, with many, many challenges, which I'll explain a bit more later if there's time. But I just want to say that, you know, it wasn't like I was coming out of a cruel childhood. It wasn't like I had parents that beat me, or, you know, it wasn't serious trauma, but the subtlety of never having the support of your parents around you, the when you needed them, of feeling alone, of having to manage alone, of being in an all-male environment, which it was. So there was no feminine energy there. And just to sum it up, as kind of to give you a sense of this sensitive boy trying to tough it out, really, because it was intended to toughen me up. I think my mother could see that I was an artistic, dreamy sort of person who wasn't going to buckle down and learn, and that this would be good for me. And in many ways it was, you know, I thrived in some respects. But I had this sense that all through those 10 years, I was holding a little candle, which was my essence, my soul, if you like. And I had to hide it from everyone else. I had to hold it very, very close so that the flame wouldn't be extinguished. And it was an absolute kind of battle to keep that protected through that time. So that was a major influence in my childhood. And it gave me an outward appearance of being calm, of being a nice, likable guy, being at ease with myself. But this was really a mask, you know, that I had to adopt, that I had to create. And I've learned later, and I'll mention it later again, go into a bit more, that this has subsequently been academically studied, that children who are sent away, even however privileged, from their parents, and have to endure this very rigid environment that certainly in my day, it was very rigid, corporal punishment, you know, physical punishment, lots of shaming in the educational style, very competitive, that we develop this kind of armoring known as strategic survival personality. And yeah, I can talk about that some more because it's applicable to lots of traumatized situations, not just my particular life experience.
Well, let's talk about it now, Arden, and because otherwise we might forget, we might get off on another tangent. So let's talk about it now. This what you said. What you said. Well, first, I also wanted to ask you. You mentioned you had different challenges with the boarding school, so maybe we could delve into one that you think is the most relevant to share here, and then let's get into what you said about what did you call it again? Sorry, the trauma.
Strategic survival personality.
Yes, that, please.
Okay, so the most relevant example I think I can give, because it is so pertinent to me being here today with you, is that I've always had a fear of and experiences of suddenly freezing with fear. So, you know, we've got the flight, fight, freeze experience when we're triggered and we go into our kind of panic mode. Well, it's prevented me from having the confidence to stand up in public and to really shine and give of my knowledge, my wisdom. It's kept me very private and protect myself from the shame of being exposing myself by having these kinds of situations happen where I can suddenly not be able to speak. And I can kind of take it back to a point at school when I was probably 10, maybe 9, 10. and we were having an English lesson. We were given a poem to go away and learn, and then to come back and be able to recite the poem by heart in the next lesson. And when it came to my turn to recite it, we were made to stand up and, recite it to the class. And I got a few lines into it, and then I went blank. This is what happened. I went blank. And instead of being helpful, maybe prompting me, giving me another chance, the teacher got quite angry and said, "This isn't good enough. You have to go away and learn it properly, and then I'll test you again." So I can't remember now whether the same thing happened more than once, but I just remember being told in a subsequent lesson to come and stand out in front of the class next to the teacher's desk. And he sat beside me as I stood there with short trousers on. And he told me to start reciting it. And every time I faltered, he whacked me over the back of the knees with a wooden ruler. This was kind of a fairly extreme, but an example of the kind of teaching methods that they sometimes used, and some teachers were much worse than others. And in subjects where I was confident, I managed to go through okay. But if there was ever something I wasn't confident about, there was so much fear involved. So it was a kind of fear-driven environment. Well, that situation meant that I've always struggled to try and memorize things, and it's undermined my confidence to be able to come up with something in the moment. And to my detriment, particularly in situations where someone's challenging me, where someone's dissing me, where someone's out of order with me, I need to, as a man, to be able to say, "I'm not accepting that, you're out of order," and really challenging and coming into my strength and my power. And because of this dysfunction, because of my being triggered with a wave of fear that comes up, it's often prevented me from standing up for myself, for doing myself justice. And I can say, and particularly as a Piscean who flows with other people's energy a lot and goes along with things and takes the easy path and is comfortable being in other people's energies, but at the risk of losing myself. I can say that I've betrayed my truth many times, and that's been a source of shame for me. I can now admit it and openly talk about it and say it, and it's been part of the journey of my second half of life to really look at shame and really look at, because I think it's a big issue with men actually, that we hide. We have a tendency to try and cover it all up, and I don't care anymore. And it is a reason why I can come on here, even though it doesn't feel like speaking to the public. It is actually putting myself out onto a public platform, and I haven't done that very much for the reasons I've explained.
You're doing absolutely amazing job. So first, I want to thank you for that and for opening your heart and sharing that story with us. So take us a little on this healing journey. When you realized that, you had come away with some significant wounding and trauma from your childhood experience at the boarding school, how did you start to heal that?
Yes. Well, because I was artistic, there were things that were happening just naturally. So because I was artistic, I wanted to go to art college. I didn't want to go to university. And I got a place at art college in 1969 for 4 years. And it was such a time of exploding sense of freedom among young people. You know, we had flower power, we had the hippie movement, we had the women's movement. We had sex, drugs, rock and roll was kind of thrown at us at that point for us to do what we would with it. And literally the freedom of coming out of the prison of school, because it was like a prison in that respect. And the experience of being able to indulge in creativity and art, and in my case it kind of moved into graphic design, actually, that was very healing in itself. It was a wonderful antidote to the years of my schooling, but I wasn't sort of thinking about that in any conscious way at that point, obviously. I then some years later, perhaps when I was in my mid to late 20s, I fell into a situation where me and some colleagues started a business. And that was a big phase of my life. And where I had become very wary of men, having been in this brutish, all-male environment at school, I didn't really trust men, and I tended to, because of my kind of gentle nature and my feminine qualities, I tended to socialize with women more and stay away from male company quite a lot. But starting this business, there were 5 of us men, and I had 12 years of wonderful engagement with working in a male environment, but in a supportive one. That was very healing. And they used to make fun of me, actually, because I studied English literature, and I did a project at Art College that was related to language and symbolism in art, in the work of Virginia Woolf. And I have quite a rich array of words that I use. And the other men were kind of less educated than me. You know, our business was about making furniture and doing really practical things. And so they often made fun of my language, but I knew they respected it as well. You know, there wasn't this kind of desire to put me down, which I'd become used to with men. So that was healing. But then I went into an early midlife crisis, and for the first time thought, I need to get some support. I need some counseling. And that really started me on a whole new phase. You know, in the end, I felt my soul was leading me away from this, the life I was leading, and this business, because it had become, I'm not naturally a businessman, I'm a craftsman. And because the business grew, you know, we had to employ people to do the menial practical work and become managers. It wasn't me. And so I decided I had to leave, but it was a hard decision to make. And in the support I got through the therapeutic process, it started to open me up and to look at deeper questions and deeper wounds. And that really has been the journey ever since, in one sense. At one level, I've been in and out of that kind of inquiry ever since, either on the in the role of the therapist or the counselor, because as the therapy, because actually what happened was, it almost seems a bit trite, but it was really true, that within 2 or 3 sessions of sitting with this therapist for the first time, I was probably 38, I found myself sitting there as I'm kind of, I'm with you, facing you, and I was thinking, wow, this is amazing, this is really fascinating, and having all that attention on me, that somebody was giving me all this attention, listening, and then the second thought was, it would be even more interesting to be in the other chair, to be in your chair, And so within a year or so of that, I started to do some training actually, and so that became another whole road in my life as well. And for some years, I combined, although I didn't act as a therapist, didn't work as a professional therapist for that many years. I combined my week with half of my week working with wood, practically away from people, using my hands and feeling that, you see, as a Piscean, I don't have any earth in my chart, in my astrological chart. And I think this need to grow, to have my hands in the soil and to work with materials like wood is very grounding, very affirming, and it kind of slows me down and gives me a sense of connection. So that's it. That's part of your question. The strategic survival personality. Yeah. Well, effectively, in order to survive as a little boy, as we all we're all similar ages when we started at the school, age 8, we were homesick, we were feeling things, but it became so unbearable to live with those painful feelings that we were either going to break down and not cope, or we had to find a way to hide all those feelings and put them somewhere outside of our conscious awareness and grow a skin, grow an armor around us. And it's kind of what it would commonly be the way that anyone going through a traumatizing experience would do. We even talk about multiple personality, where we literally split into different characters who don't have any connection with each other. But that's extreme. That's more extreme. I'm not talking about that. But the reason it's been studied, particularly with people who either were sent away to institutions because they couldn't stay at home with their parents, like foster homes or care home. Well, yes, but particularly with boarding school, it's been studied because when people have presented themselves for therapy, therapists have realized that they're often the most difficult people to help, because our protection from the pain, from the disowned parts of us, is so strong, is so effective. And it often means that, I've been with ex-boarders who went through similar experiences to me, who would absolutely deny that they had any unhappy time there, that it was all wonderful, that it was fine, and they loved it. And in the case of someone who maybe wasn't leaving home to be in that environment until they were in their 12 or 13 early teens, where it can be very, very valuable. Anyone who's been sent away younger than that, I don't buy it if they say it was a wonderful time. It's just that their armoring is more effective, and they're not willing to let any of their protection down to themselves, let alone to the outside world.
Right.
But I was told, after I'd done a 3-year training to qualify to become a therapist, counsellor, I was advised by my trainers that they just learned about a man who had set up workshops specifically for men and women who would describe themselves as survivors of boarding school. And in other words, people that were struggling with the effects of their early experiences there. And he published a book, very good book, and made a film too. And I watched the film. I resonated so much with it. I read the book, and it told me a lot about my own situation. But I somehow told myself that I didn't need to do these workshops, that I was getting enough support in the other ways that I was. 25 years later, I finally decided these workshops were what I needed. And I went and sat with 20 men for 2 or 3 weekends who all had a similar, not the same story, but were all reporting very similar challenges in their adult life as a result of experience that they'd had, you know. And often it was just out and out bullying. Some children, as I remember from my school, were the sons of military people who were stationed overseas. And so they didn't even get to see their parents other than in the holidays, or maybe just once a year during the summer holidays. So lots of different situations, but it was so healing to be in a room with these 20 men who were all coming to reveal, often for the first time, that their lives had been a struggle, and they knew it was because of some of the wounds from their boarding school experience.
Then let's talk about the English culture, because my background's English as well. My parents are English, and I just know when you spoke earlier about this with your parents, this emotional closure. And I know it's not just England, but you know, we've obviously got that in common. And you know, it is, I don't know now in England, but very common with our parents' generation, our generation, and hopefully now it's warming up a bit. What do you say to men who have had this closed emotional cultural experience? How do they start exploring and identifying and coming to feel emotions and talk about them?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's not easy to know where to begin, and I imagine it's probably going to be different for different people. But I would say that there's no avoidance of self-inquiry. We have to find situations where we're willing to give time and find the safety for it to be possible to start talking. And I guess it takes practice. And as I know to my own cost, that it takes practice to notice what we're feeling. And that involves connecting to our body. I've come very late, really, to giving enough focus to embodying practices that give me the possibility to connect my head, my heart, and my gut enough, because that is necessary in order for us to feel and to know what we're feeling. So that's one answer. I think we need to look at specific feelings like anger, like grief, like shame, which are 3, I would say, particularly dominant but often hidden feelings that men either experience or need to experience. But there's then the question of, in what way do we start to connect with those feelings? In terms of anger, is it that literally we just lash out and we have no other way of expressing our anger? In which case, we need to find a way to kind of slow down those moments and let the feeling, take responsibility for the feeling. I guess that would be in that case, rather than just pushing it out and projecting it onto some situation. With shame, it's much more hidden, and can be very toxic. and it's probably much harder to work with. But I sense from doing men's work and being in men's groups and the work that I've done with people is, and again, in my very own experience, a partner tells me often that she senses I'm feeling shame, but I'm not able to notice it and own it and let it come out into the light. Because the other aspect of shame is, while it's hidden, it eats away at us. And we need to own it and let it be seen, and then it can dissolve, and it becomes less charged. Fear is another one. And in men, I think it's maybe common, I'm at risk of generalizing here, but I think it's common that men cover up fear by becoming angry in order to sort of overcome the fear, get into an empowered place. So by inquiring, by having the opportunity, by creating the opportunity to sit down away from the coalface often, but in reflection of things that are going on in someone's life, by being willing to really look at those things, and I called it self-inquiry, but it's not easy to do on our own. It's much easier and much more has much more potential for change within a relationship, but it needs to be a relationship where the other party is doing their own work or has some kind of emotional intelligence themselves. And otherwise it's probably necessary at some point at least to get help with that and to pay someone who is qualified and able to support and facilitate the healing, the change, the awareness that comes, and the intelligence emotionally that can come.
Yeah.
So that's maybe one approach, but there's also, I feel, because of my experience, having a connection with a highest trusted source can be a big support in this. Yes. Because otherwise it's very ego based, it's very egocentric. The whole thing is around, me and my problems. Whereas if we can hand some of that over, and if we can feel somehow that an unseen hand is holding us on our shoulder, that can be a big support.
Yeah. Ardhan, what do you say to men of your era, your age group, who just say, oh, I'm too old, I'm never going to change, I've only got maybe, they're sort of limited more with thinking that, they're at the end of their lives and it's just not worth the effort and the money to change, or some just maybe just don't want to change. What do you say to those men?
Yeah. Well, it is true that young people who have the wisdom to get help early are much more open to change. Young people's systems are more flexible, more reshapeable. And as we get older, the ruts that we get into run deeper, and it's harder to get out of them. I have to admit that. And I know that for a fact. But in a way, the reason I'm here today is because I'm a testament to the fact that it's never too late. I'm not giving up on this. I had some years, perhaps 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, where I was tired of the feeling of the effort of having to try and not be a different person, but to find some resolution in those things that were always a struggle for me. But with the support of my partner and somehow a determination not to grow old, you know, that I'm full of enthusiasm for life. In fact, we chose a word at the beginning of the year to start the new year with, and I chose the word enthusiasm because it's up to us. It's our responsibility to keep our body as young and fit as we can, to enable us to enjoy life, to stay interested in things. I mean, I've just started learning to play the Indian flute, the bansuri flute, bamboo. And it's very difficult, you know. I'm never going to be good at it because it takes 10 years probably. But yeah, the key really is self-belief and the world is speeding up all the time. So it does become harder to keep abreast of things and to stay relevant, to feel relevant. But I'm determined, and I've always been outside. I've always had this sense. There's another thing to say, actually, is that I didn't have any conscious sense that I belonged in my family or that I didn't belong in my family. It was just, this is my life up to the age of 8. And then within a year or so of being in this boarding school environment, I didn't feel as though I belonged at home anymore. I've partly because I was having to be like the boys and in the paradigm that I was living in, and it was so foreign to my parents and my sister's experience of life. I was learning lots more things than they knew about too, so I could be kind of, you know, I'm above them. I'm intellectual. But that was just a way of justifying and trying to make it work. But I've always had this sense of not quite belonging anywhere, and so I've lived on the edge of society, and I've needed to because of my thin skin, but it's also served me very well. I have a more of a kind of bird's eye view of the world from a bit of distance. And I found ways of living by grace, you know. Soul's path really has been a soul's path. And I'm now in a situation where I feel like I'm outside the matrix. You know, my partner and I have as much of a grip on the truth of what's going on in the world as is possible, with so much disinformation going around. And it's so challenging to know too much. And yet, and this is a really important point about my life, when I left school, went to art college, at that time, the late 1960s, early 70s, there was this big movement among some young people to want to say no to our parents' values and to the world we saw, the sort of industrial growth society that was growing around us, and the drudgery of the life that people are even more kind of enslaved to now than they were even back then. Some of us wanted to go back to the land and create a different way of living that was closer to nature, that was more honest, more simple, more directly connected to life. You know, take responsibility for as much of our own food as we can, take responsibility for creating small community and all those things. I don't need to explain much detail. Call it the new earth. Dropping out of society, creating a new earth. I was so idealistic about that, and I was so inspired by that. And I read books and I did all I could to inform myself. And because I'd had to learn at school to provide all my needs for myself, it served me very well because I learned lots of skills. I didn't want someone else to do this for me. I wanted to know how to do it myself. So I've restored houses. I've learned to grow vegetables. I can do lots of different kinds of DIY. And this is the pragmatist who sits alongside the mystic. And I'm still hopeful, even though we went through what we call the Thatcher years of the 1980s, and all that's happened since. I'm more than ever hopeful, hanging on to that hope that we can create a new Earth, and because of COVID and because of what's being revealed, that's been underlying our story in the world, and revealing the fact that so much of what we learned about history and the wars is all lies and all cover-ups. More and more people now are seeing the need to start again, to escape it and go and try and get down to living off the land, creating local communities and becoming more self-sufficient and saying, no, we don't want this shit anymore. And that is what I always held on to in my life, and there's more chance of that now, probably. I have to believe that anyway.
Yes.
There's ever been, so that's another thing that keeps me young, because I'd love to see something of that before I reach the end. And I'd like, can I just, I came across this quote only 2 days ago, just like to read it because it's very relevant to what I've just said. Now, this is Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden, which people may not know that book now, but it was a very popular book when I was young. And it is about someone in the in the 1890s, I think, in America, who went out and built a cabin in the woods and made a different lifestyle for himself and wrote about it. Anyway, he said, "Have you built castles in the air? That is where you're meant to be. But now put foundations under them." Simple, really.
Yeah.
But we need to dream. We need new stories. We desperately need new stories to how to live. And we need new rituals. We need new rites of passage to help people get a sense of who they are and where we might go and what we really want. Because if enough people say no to what our governments and our authorities wanting us to do, they can't do fuck all about it if enough of us do what we want to do.
So true. And I wanted to ask you about the 60s, because as you said, the late 60s, the hippie movement, there was this sense of freedom, and especially you were at art college being so creative and finally free for your own self-expression. What happened to that generation's freedom? Like, at what point did they say, oh, we're not going to go and build all these communities on the land like, you had aspirations for? What happened?
Yes. Well, we are learning now that it was kind of engineered, in fact, that it was manipulated and it was encouraged, but in the way that they were able to stimulate it and steer it and allow it, they also knew how to bring it down. And it's a bit of a mystery. I don't know that I have the answer, really, other than the fact that they played on people's greed and stimulated people's desire for acquisition and for progress and for material life, such that certainly by the next generation, there wasn't the appeal anymore, and also, I guess, because it was idealistic in its nature, many of the actual projects and communities that started up with those aims failed.
Right.
And so it was easy then to say, well, look at that, that didn't work. So let's just get on with trying to get a mortgage and create the material wealth that gives us a sense of luxury. But of course, and I think I learned this quite young as well, although I didn't escape the grips of it until much later. We're encouraged to feel that there's always the next thing that is going to make life better for us. And we strive for it, whether it's simply a gift that we hope we're given for our birthday, or whether it's we're going to get a rise at work, more income, or whether we're going to get a better house to live in. There's always that kind of carrot and stick incentive. And it takes a long time, I think, for most of us to realize that in the end, it never actually fills the hole. It never fills that need inside. And in my case, perhaps I did have a sense of that by the time I was 40. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but I had a big phase of going into Buddhism, learning the philosophy of Buddhism, Buddhist practice, meditation. And central to that philosophy is this idea of non-attachment. And so I had a very conscious phase of questioning my desires and my sense of, I'm grasping at things, and questioning that and undermining it almost to my detriment. And although it was a hugely valuable, spiritually, hugely valuable 10 to 15 years of my life, in the middle of my life, I had to face the fact that I was bypassing a lot of my emotional problems by going so fully into the kind of the spiritual being the answer, And that's another thing I think that hopefully I can offer in this interview is that if going into following a spiritual tradition or a spiritual practice feels like the answer to our life's problems, just to be aware that it can so easily be a bypass, a spiritual bypass of the other aspects of us that need attention, that we need to look at. And it's a very well-known mistake to make. It's not a very good way of putting it, but it's well written about as well. And you've had Bernard Gunther in your interviews, and I've just last autumn done him and his partner Laura's training course called Embodied Soul Awakening. And I can, although it's expensive, I can recommend it so highly, because unusually, because I haven't seen this offered in many places, they are offering with real conscious intention a balance of support for embodied practice, spiritual practice, and psychological inquiry. And it is so necessary to have all three.
So what was the main takeaway from this course? How does a man balance those three aspects?
Yeah. It's a lot about literally doing the practice, daily, regular practice. I mean, the most effective, I haven't experienced them actually, but most effective treatments for trauma have been developed by people like Peter Levine, and they all involve physical exercises, embodied practices, addressing, because we somatize these wounds in the body itself. Breathwork can be quite helpful. I've done a training in breathwork, and I currently lead breathwork sessions from the men's group that I'm connected with once a month. And breathwork can be quite effective. I won't go into a description of it, but it certainly comes on the basis, or it works on the basis, that everything that's ever happened to us is encoded in the body. It's like the body is a library of everything that's happened to us. So where healing has become kind of stuck or unprocessed, these embodied practices, I would include breath work, just start to open up and make it possible for the body to continue processing these issues and resolving them. And it takes time. Writing is another way, and it's another way that I use. Free writing, particularly, where you, like journaling, where you literally sit down and you let the pen write what it wants to write, and you don't think, you think as little about it as possible, because then it can come up from the unconscious. And I know how healing that can be as part of a process. And because writing is one of my things, one of my strap lines is that I'm a carver of wood and words. And so words have always been important to me. And I'm currently writing a book, actually, my partner's ahead of me. She wears the trousers, in fact. And it's been a pattern of my life that I've been a follower, and I've been happy to be a follower in many ways. I've needed the direction because of my two fishes that swim in different directions and often leave me a bit kind of watery and confused about what's important to do next. So she leads the way. And within that, I'm finding my own individual sovereignty now with her help, actually. But she's writing a book. She's nearly finished it. And that in itself is an injunction, is a help, is a support to me to get on with finding the time to do my own writing. And it'll be a memoir, but I'm hoping that I can include enough to engage someone's interest, particularly men, in order to impart some of what I've learned along the way, as I'm trying to do now.
Yeah. And you told me in, I think it was in your email to me, that you had always attracted strong women, and at the risk of losing yourself in them and the relationship. Would you like to expand on this, please? And what solutions have you got to maintaining, preserving yourself within a relationship now?
Yeah, it's been a big theme, and I can say to myself, you made the same mistake 3 or 4 times and didn't learn the lesson. But I think overall it's been necessary and helpful. And of course it comes fundamentally from the fact that I lost my sense of my mother too young, and I was looking for mother in my partner, and that's not unusual. I think we all do that unconsciously. If you're a woman, you're looking for your father, until you become conscious enough of that to perhaps question it a little bit when you see who's attracting you. That's been at the base of my attractions and where I've been drawn. perhaps less so in my marriage. I met my wife at art college and had wonderful 20 years, and we had a daughter, and we didn't have a son, which I'm sad about, but we had a daughter, and we created a wonderful life. But that did end. And in that relationship, it wasn't so much that she dominated. I think I could say that she was manipulative in that feminine way. So it was a way of her holding the power. And I was always easily led, codependent. That's another aspect of healing that I think is so common that we need to question and address. Many people, codependency. But to stay with your question, yeah, I was looking for someone who had similar aims, who was perhaps achieving in the outer world more than I was, but whom I could support and help and feel part of that process, that aim, that project, through the partnership, through the relationship. And that's the case with my partner now. We've been together for 10 years, actually. But in my midlife, I left my marriage eventually because I felt we had gone so far in different directions. And our daughter was nearly 16 by then. Because in this Buddhist phase, I met a woman who had been running a trekking company, an English woman running a trekking company in the Himalayas, had found Buddhism there and had brought back to a more settled life in England the desire to set up a small Buddhist retreat center. And she was also dedicated to local community, ecological thinking, and really addressing in a modern way the values of Buddhism, which is to live lightly on the planet and to yeah, I'm just nearly on the edge of one of my moments of going blank now. So there you are. There's a demonstration. But I think I can work through it. So yes, I was drawn to go and live with this woman and help her develop and grow this Buddhist retreat center, and it was amazing. My dreams of living this ecological lifestyle was actually realized there with her. All my practical skills. And we started running courses in ecological living combined with spiritual dimension. And it was fantastic. We even got a £100,000 grant to set up local community groups working on environmental issues and yeah, lots of things, and that all came out of our initial attraction for each other, with her as the sort of driving force and me as the follower. But in the end, I mean, while it worked, and I was willing, able, and had the capacity to flex and move and follow and adapt. But in the end, I suppose the core of my being was crying out for where am I in this? Where's me in this? Other than just being not a slave, but certainly the pair of hands, if you like, that were doing the things. And I went to get some support because I really got a bit depressed, I think, but burned out, maybe on the edge of burnout. I went to get some support, and again, sitting with a counsellor, And in my third session with her, she said, "You seem to be describing everything through your partner's eyes, not through your eyes. Where are you in this?" And I kind of jerked up a bit. And she said, "This is not easy to say, but I feel as though you need to separate yourself from this woman. Otherwise, it's going to kill you." And, that's a shocking thing to say. But I knew from my own experience in that world of therapy that she wouldn't have said it if she didn't feel it was serious enough to need to be said. And so I did eventually have to leave. But it didn't teach me fully the lesson. I still found myself being drawn into a brief but really disastrous relationship with another woman who was manipulative. She was more skillful. She was a bit of a gold digger, really, and it was harder for me to see through her very loving, giving, emotionally aware sort of character that she presented to the world. So when I came to Italy and to live with my current partner, she and I both were feeling very wounded from previous relationships. And we started with a clean slate, with a level of honesty where there weren't games. We tried to avoid games. I still need encouragement to open up and share and not hide, because part of my strategic survival personality is that the instinct to hide everything. And so, yeah, we have a very different relationship. She still wears the trousers, but she's so aware of it, and she so longs to be the woman and for me to be the masterful side of the relationship. And so I have these opportunities and to change the dynamic. And it's a big learning, and it's coming late. And the working title of my book is "It's Been a Long Time Coming." And it applies to so many aspects of me personally and to what I see in the world. So yeah, my single message to anyone who's listening is don't give up. Find the enthusiasm to chip away at the coalface, even though nobody wants the inevitable pain of sometimes of having to face things, but the rewards can be so worthwhile.
Wonderful. Adam, when you're doing this men's work, and I imagine that you're hearing that the masculine energy is the leader and, more assertive and grounded. And how does that make you feel if you said, as you said in your own words, you're quite happy to be a follower?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've spent the first half of my life feeling ashamed and trying to compensate for not feeling man enough, not feeling like the classic idea of what a man should be. But with the help of the fact that some of those very polarized values have softened and are changing over the decades, and with my sort of self-inquiry journey and my own determination to feel the right to be who I am in the world and to not feel bad about it. I've spent the second half of my life finding ways to celebrate being how I am, who I am. I'm never going to be someone whose ruling sign in my astrology is Mars. It's always going to be the softer ones, and I value what I would describe as my feminine qualities. My ability to empathize, to feel, when I feel safe to feel, and to resonate. And I did have, just wondering whether to mention this. One of the worst experiences I had at boarding school was that I became very unpopular, because I was a late developer in terms of puberty, and I still looked very young in my early teens. I still looked sort of very young and girlish, if you like. And because it was an all-male environment and everyone's testosterone was kind of raging through puberty, with nowhere for it to go, a lot of attention was put on me and one or two other boys like me. And it, in some ways, I enjoyed the attention, because I needed people to think I was attractive or okay or a nice guy. But because there was this sort of distorted element to that attention, and I lived in fear of, not only lived in fear of being set on homosexually, which didn't really happen, but there was this kind of fear from the older boys, but also they were treating me as though I was a girl, and that was very disturbing as a young boy coming in through puberty, and trying to find out who I was anyway. And this persisted for 2 or 3 years. And it was like bullying, but it wasn't bullying. It was much more subtle. It was a sort of psychological thing. So it came to a head because although I didn't fight back physically, I found ways to sort of rise above it and to discourage it. And I became very unpopular when I was 15 or so. It sort of turned a bit nasty. And they literally, one night, in the middle of the night, my own classmates, probably about 5 or 6 of them, attacked me in bed. And it was sexualized, and it wasn't a physical rape, but it was a psychological rape, if you like. And so I had this sense of what it must be like to be a woman, to be a feminine, in a feminine body. And it was shocking. And I had to work through a lot to be able to kind of get up the next day and go into class with these same guys and pretend that it didn't happen, or mainly pretend that they hadn't hurt me, actually. I can hear the sort of croaking in my voice because it brings up a lot of emotion for me even now. So I lived with that secretly. I never told anyone. I never told my parents. I never told even my wife. Later on, maybe in the end I did. But it gave me a sense of the vulnerability of being a victim. And it took me a long time to climb out of that. But on the positive side, when I qualified as a therapist and started inviting people to come and work with me, they were all women. They were all women who were damaged, often sexually damaged, who needed to learn to trust a trustworthy man again. And I was that kind of understanding, trustworthy man. Now I don't do one-to-one therapy. I'm retired in that sense, but all my work seems to be focused around men, not around women. So it's just an interesting kind of shift and dynamic.
Definitely. So we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. We can go over if you like, because you're full of such beautiful stories, but I don't want to forget about talking about sensitive men. So you're self-described as a sensitive man. What message have you got for other men who feel that they are sensitive too? And what strategies have you got for navigating life as a sensitive man?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, my partner has a phrase which encapsulates something of this, which is learning not to throw your pearls to swine. I think it might come from some source like Shakespeare or something. I don't know. But basically, the first thing is not to put yourself at risk by showing vulnerability where it can be taken advantage of. And that's not always possible, but just to be mindful of protecting, in my case, I speak personally, protecting my my sensitivity. And one thing I haven't talked about, which is again another therapeutic way of looking at it, is it's as though that my vulnerable little boy is standing out front in everything I do, you know, saying, don't make me do this. I'm not old enough to manage this. And that, you know, that's palpable. So part of the process, particularly if we're sensitive, is learning to be aware of our inner child and to parent it, to protect it, and to reassure him that he doesn't have to do the work, that he can stay safe in the background. And that implies, you know, that we are developing the adult parts of our personality that can stay in charge, in strong, and manage things. That's only a partial answer to your question. I think I've conveyed quite well already that it's not something to be ashamed of. Not all men are going to be macho alpha men. You know, it's not the way the world works, and something similar applies to women for sure. So I think if we've got wounding around that, which is likely, then doing the healing work to come to terms with that is important. And perhaps making sensible choices about what direction your life goes in, so that you can use your strengths, your qualities in appropriate ways, and make your life work for you on your strengths, which may be seen to be your weaknesses, if you see what I mean, if that's not a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Adam, was there anything else that you really wanted to bring into this conversation that we haven't touched on?
Well, you are invited because I guess you'd seen my website, my blog, and I have some poems and writings on there. You invited me to read something. And if there's time, I'd like to read two things, because the first one hopes to give a taste of the mystic in me, and the second one, the pragmatist, the guy who uses his hands.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
I'll do that. Can I? Yeah. Okay. I'll just bring them up. I'm going to put my other glasses on, if I may. So this is called Between Two Worlds. And if I haven't emphasized it enough already, my greatest most fruitful and easiest connection to the divine is in nature, really. Standing in that cusp where twilight meets the dark, the thinnest veil of mist hangs in dampened silence under autumn trees. All movement ceases now. No creatures of the night are stirring from their rest. No sounds to break this spell that sits between two worlds. Just a tired leaf tumbling stiffly in surrender to the earth. And far below, the river sends white noise like a distant songline destined for the sea. I barely breathe in honor of this grace, watching troubled thoughts dissolve to create space for inner resonance with all around me. As dusk's light fades, my inner light shines forth, its sacred source, subtle like the mist in silent presence, allows me mystic time for soft connection in the still point purity of peace. Far off, a dog bark, messaging his master, wakes me back to sleep, triggering a question: how to straddle what's out there with what's inside. I need these nature prompts while thoughts of all the worldly strife come pouring in like urgent liquid lapping at my feet. So that's the first poem.
Beautiful, thank you.
And the second one. So I wrote this a few years ago, but it's called Furniture Making. Strong fingers grip the hand plane's handle. Blade slick sharp glides with a swish. Shavings stream away like cut curls to the floor. Saw's teeth marks fade from the rough plank. Satin smooth surface, revealing grain lines known as figure, each piece unique. Incised lines mark square measured joints, shouldered saw pushed back and forth, thumb guided, wrist controlled, eye and hand coordinate an acquired precision. Fragrant dust falling from the saw's teeth makes little anthills on the workshop floor. Joints offered, eased and chiseled for a satisfying final fit. Coarse sand, fine sand, polish and buff. Time and patience pays, no shortcuts here. Touch and smell of elm, of chestnut, ash, sycamore, yew, pine, and oak. Handling the chisels, sap rises now in distant memories of youthful vigor, skills not lost.
Lovely, and such a beautiful insight into, as you said, your aspects of what we say, grounded spirituality there, because you've got your mystic sort of spiritual side, and as you said, balancing it with nature and the groundedness. So that's a beautiful representation. Thank you. Ardhan, where can people find you?
Well, currently I do have an Instagram account where I mostly just post photographic work that I do. It's not commercial in any way, but I have a website and it's called Inner Ventures, plural, .me, innerventures.me. I'm also building another website using my surname, but it's not active yet. So my writings, some of my writings and poems are on my Inner Ventures website, and some more information about me. And as I get closer to my book writing, I'm intending to publish maybe chapters, bits, tasters, and put them on platforms, different platforms for writers, like Substack, for instance, is one that I have an account with. So that's it, really.
Yeah, I'll drop all those links below. Thank you. So, Ardhan, what's your final message to men, please?
Final message to men. Yeah. Well, I do have I don't have a direct connection with many young men. I feel so deeply, particularly for men coming into their adulthood now in the world, but all young men, the world is in a fucking mess, and it's a nightmare, and we have to somehow find our own way through this, each of us individually, and I feel for you desperately in how you do that. But my main message would be that if there's a sense somewhere that you can create a connection with a higher trusted source, it could be nature, it could be physical fitness, even can bring that sense, or your God, whatever that might be, whether you name it as God or not. I feel as though it's more essential than ever, because what else have we got to hold on to? I know one or two young men whose prospects for making their way conventionally in the world is so difficult right now. It's such a challenge that they're on the verge of giving up hope and giving up a belief in themselves. So please, men, believe in yourself. We are all unique. We all have some unique gifts to offer. And the future can be a real wonderful shift into a new earth. It's just how long that might take. I believe that, and I hang on to that hope.
Yeah, well, it's already happening. And before I forget, I was going to mention it back when we were talking about the hippies. I've heard that there's and I haven't been to the movies for years, but I might just go this week. Apparently, there's a movie coming out this week called The Jesus Revolution, and it's all about the hippies. And apparently, it's a white hat operation. You know how now the entertainment industry, we hope, is being quite infiltrated, and there's some actual movies that are trying to sway the narrative a bit in the minds and hearts of people. So apparently this has got a good rating in the sort of truther community about how the hippies, this freedom movement, and how it was instigated and squashed and diverted. So that might be worth seeing.
Yes, yeah. Well, that is real positive hope, isn't it? That the messages through the media that are going to support a new earth and a way forward are actually happening now, with genuine agenda for good, as opposed to the satanic one.
Yeah, I'd like to think so too. Wow, what a gift this conversation was. Thank you so much for sharing your story and reaching out, and with such incredible memories and stories of healing. So such an inspiration for all men out there. Thank you so much, Ardhan.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. If you could like, share, subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with another episode of Heart Warriors. Thank you. Bye. Stay on if you like.